Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren Beauchesne, and today I'm going to be talking about the book Fostering Resilient Learners Strategies for Creating a Trauma-Sensitive Classroom by Kristen Sowers with Pete Hall. On this podcast episode, I'm going to be talking about the 4 major things that I took away from reading this book. There were so many things that I could have talked about, but these were the main 4 things that are applicable to teaching and things that I'm going to be using in the future to drive my own practice in the classroom. One of the first things from this book that really captured my attention was when Kristen Sowers, the author, explains the different types of responses that different people can have to trauma. So she explains that when the brain senses danger or when a child doesn't feel safe, they enter a survival mode. And in this survival mode, they can have different responses. Sometimes it's fight, sometimes it's flight, or it's sometimes a freeze response, which was new to me. I'd never heard about freeze. So a fight response could look like aggressive behaviors towards the teacher or maybe other students, hyperactivity in the classroom, acting out in certain ways. A flight response could look like withdrawing from classroom activities. Maybe the student is running out of the classroom. Maybe they're avoiding their work. Maybe they're avoiding participating. And then a freeze response is basically just what it sounds like. It's when the student kind of appears numb and they're kind of refusing to do anything. This could mean they're staying quiet to themselves and just kind of frozen because they're kind of in that survival mode. Because they're dealing with trauma. And I really like this quote from the book. It's stressed brains can't teach and stressed brains can't learn. And this really resonated with me because it's so true, like that when we're stressed, we can't be the best versions of ourselves as teachers. So we have to really take it from a student's perspective and realize that when they're dealing with certain traumatic experiences, they're not going to be able to learn to the best of their ability. The next thing from this book that was really eye-opening and interesting to me was that Kristen Sowers talks about how there has been an increase of student behaviors in the classroom across America in recent years. She brings in a statistic from the Children's Defense Fund in 2010, which is that public elementary schools and secondary schools in the U.S. expel 110,000 students, suspend 3 million students, and they give tens of millions of detentions in a year. So that statistic really just encapsulates like how much discipline and how much removal, how much we're removing students from the classroom and how prevalent that is. And dealing with student behaviors is something that I have personally worried about as a future educator, and I know a lot of my classmates have also been nervous to implement some of these things and deal with challenging behaviors that could be a result from a traumatic experience that a student has dealt with in their life. So Kristen Sowers, the author, talks about how discipline and consequence are always the subject of the discussion, but teachers are rarely talking about proactive ways of keeping children in the classroom. And this point kind of reminded me of a topic we talked about earlier in the semester, which was we want to attempt to get students to be intrinsically motivated to learn by implementing techniques such as the target model before we jump into using reactive techniques, such as punishing a student for not doing their work. So really, she emphasizes those proactive things that teachers can be doing to keep students in the classroom who might have difficult behaviors, and it might be easier to remove them from the classroom setting. But as teachers, we should really prioritize keeping all of our students in the classroom so that they can learn and continue to grow. And also, she really just emphasizes that discipline is not the solution to the rise in behaviors, and making connections with children is really something that's going to make the world of difference. The third thing that I really wanted to point out about this book is that throughout the book, as it talks about trauma and trauma-informed practices, it offers reflective questions for educators so that they can evaluate their own practices and maybe fill in some gaps and see where they can improve. So one example, actually two examples I wanted to share. On page 37, one of the reflection questions is, there is one element of the trauma equation that you can control, yourself. How might you focus on keeping yourself in your upstairs brain? So this is meant for teachers to kind of reflect on what can you do to help you stay in that rational brain, and so that you're thinking rationally when you're dealing with difficult behaviors in the classroom. And then on page 155, one of the reflection questions for teachers is, think of the students you work with. What do you provide for them when they are not okay? Do you have a safe place in your classroom setting? Have you established a ritual or routine that they can look forward to? How do you communicate, "You are safe with me," to your students? So these were two questions that really made me really think about what I've done in my own field experiences and what I might continue to do as a future educator to make sure I'm providing the best environment for my students, whether they've experienced trauma or if, they're just going through something. The last thing that I wanted to highlight from this book, there's a lot of things that I could have highlighted, but I really wanted to highlight the whole child approach. Kristen Sowers talks about how we should be looking at children as a whole and not just looking at their life in school and their academic achievements, but we should be looking at the whole picture. It's like looking at a whole puzzle, not just one piece of the puzzle. And one quote I liked that she has in there from James Comer, he says, "Students don't care to learn until we learn to care." And that really resonated with me because it just highlights how important those relationships are and how when we start to get to know students and care about them as individuals as a whole and not just who they are in our classroom, that relationship starts to form. And when there's trust, students can be their best selves in the classroom and they will be more willing to learn. And Kristen kind of explains that in her book. But basically the whole child approach could look like giving students a classroom role, checking in and checking out. That basically means you could check in with certain students in the morning and then check out at the end of the day just to see what happened today, how was your day, was there anything they wanted to talk about. Another way to kind of get that whole child approach is notes home or calls home, whether it's good or bad, but that family communication is really important. Connecting with families and getting to know them is crucial to developing that relationships. And then providing daily rituals for students can be really helpful, especially students who have experienced trauma. That predictability is something that they look forward to because they might not have that in their living environment. So those are just a few things that go along with that whole child approach. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed. I really recommend this book for anyone who is interested in learning more about trauma-informed teaching, and have a great day. Bye.